How we doing tonight? My name is Simon. I'm one of the pastors here. Welcome to Cross and Crown as we go through our Reasonable Doubt lecture series. We are so glad you came to join us. So, a couple things that you know. Our bathrooms are, you can go through the back around the side. There's bathrooms over here in our parlor, and then there are snacks in the back. Feel free to grab some of those and enjoy those. We are very grateful that you've come to be here with us tonight as we learn more about creative design and how that is and where that came from. So I get the pleasure of introducing our speaker tonight. And there's a couple things. So I've known Al for a long time, and he's a very humble man who knows a whole lot about a whole lot of things. And so he is one of the chief scientists at NASA. He has his master's in aero engineering, correct? Yep, I got the correct on that one. Some of his work is in the Smithsonian. He has written, we decided it was 42 published papers that you've written at this point. And weird thing about Al, you will talk with Al and he'll say something that sounds very normal, like, oh, I went to the liquor store and I got a drink. He'll say things like, oh, look out your window in the northern quadrant of the sky, the space station is flying by and my friend just texted me to look up. People don't say that, Al. That's not a normal conversation. So we are so grateful that he is here to, he is also, by the way, one of the first elders that I was able to install at Soma Community Church, where I was a church planter in Southern California. So all that being said, please welcome Al up here so he can tell us more about this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. Where to start? First of all, need to say that your taxpayer dollars are not paying for me to be here tonight, okay? This is not an official part of my duties as a NASA aerospace engineer or the chief scientist. I've got a few things I want to talk about tonight. Let's go to the first chart. And by the way, there's a test at the end. No, seriously. I need to explain something about our place. We're out in the Mojave Desert. We work primarily on aircraft, but we do have some spacecraft stuff that we do. I've been at NASA for over 36 years, almost 37 years. And I don't know what it is to interview for a job. I did an internship with NASA, and they said, we would really like to hire you. And I'm going, okay, yeah, where do I sign, you know? And I went to work for them. And my wife, I have to say something about my wife at this point. My wife has put up with me for 38 years. We met for the very first time 38 years ago tonight. Yeah. And I am not with her, and I owe her flowers. I'm just saying, okay. Anyway, at our place, we're a bunch of experimentalists. We do experiments on aircraft, spacecraft, all sorts of different kind of vehicles. As experimentalists, we understand the uncertainty of doing things, how much error there is in the measurement that you're making, how much error there is in the device, in the way that it's manufactured, how much error is there in the instrumentation that downlinks that data to where you're recording it. And that makes us uncomfortable. We know how bad that information is. We do our best, weasel word, to try and minimize those errors. But as a result of this, we tend to walk around with our hands in our pockets. We call these NASA gloves. And I'm doing it right now, actually. We walk around, we look at our shoes. okay? We're always looking down. It's really difficult for us to look people in the face and talk to them. That would make us uncomfortable, all right? And so I do recall a day when I was walking down the hall and the director of our place was walking down the hall towards me. And he saw me coming and he didn't want to talk to me. And so he crossed the hall to the other side and walked along the other wall so he wouldn't have to talk to me. And I knew what he was thinking, and so I did not say hello. So we have a joke at our place about when an engineer is being assertive, how do you know that he's being assertive? He looks at your shoes. Okay. This photo was taken in 1968. This is 2018. It was taken on Christmas Eve. So this Christmas Eve, I'm sure you're going to hear about this because it will be the 50th anniversary of Apollo 8. Now, this particular event was mind-bending in many, many ways because it was the first time any humans had ever left low Earth orbit and had crossed to another world, and they were the first ones to orbit the moon. The three gentlemen that did that, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, read from Genesis that night. And so in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And they read the entire first chapter. And that, I remember this. It was truly incredible. They were test pilots. And I want you to imagine test pilots. They're the best at what they do. They're the best of the pilots. They ask them, they will tell you. And they are incredibly self-assured about what it is they do. But one of the most incredible things was, and this was the first time it happened, they came back from the moon, and the whole time, all they were looking at was the earth. And they realized that every single person that they had ever known, that has ever lived, was on that blue ball. And every single astronaut that came back from the moon talks about this in a very reverential awe. Now, these are test pilots. You know, I'm the best. And even worse, out of all the test pilots, they chose me as an astronaut. And they all felt very, very small and humble because of this, at how unique the Earth was. We're going to talk a little bit about that more. How did I come to this particular position? Let me start with another verse real quick. Jesus is giving us a lesson. Matthew 6:26. Consider the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, yet our heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of much greater value than these? Well, the only problem was, consider the birds of the air, and I stopped right there. Let's go to the next one. Here we go. This is a wandering albatross. You would be amazed how much we don't know about these animals. This animal, by the way, weighs about 20 pounds, about like a turkey. If you get down on your knees, they're about that high when you are just on your knees. Their wingspan is about 12 feet. We don't know how long they live. We do know that when they choose a mate, that is their mate for life, except that they tend to lose their mates fairly frequently, and it's not a good thing. Usually they end up drowning because of long line fishing. And so they'll see bait in the water, and they'll dive down and grab the bait, and they can't disentangle themselves from the hook, and they drown. And that is incredibly disruptive to the albatross. It will be 5 to 7 years before they can find another mate. And it turns out that they lay an egg every other year. I mentioned we don't know how long they live. We think maybe about 80 years. The other thing is they will lay an egg with their mate until the day they die. They also, from the egg to being full size is 4 months. And then they fly off. And in 2012, a gentleman named Gottfried Sachs from Technical University of Munich GPS tagged some of these birds. And it was the first time that we found out what these birds did for 8 months out of the year. 4 months out of the year, they're at their roosting grounds with their family. They always go back to the same place, their tribe, their family, their cousins and aunties and uncles, and it's a family gathering. But 8 months out of the year, no one knew what they did. It turns out they fly around Antarctica 5 to 7 times every year for 80 years. The oldest known albatross in the wild right now, her name is Wisdom. She is 68 years old. Next, if she comes back in February to her nesting ground, she'll be 69. Last year, her chick, Nikuni, fledged and flew off. The male and the female take turns sitting on the egg and taking care of the chick. The other one will go forage and eat and come back and then feed the chick, and then they'll take turns back and forth until the youngster fledges and flies off and starts flying around Antarctica 5 to 7 times every year. We had no idea until 2012 when that data first came in. These are amazing animals. And the thing was, when we build aircraft, we usually put a vertical tail on the aircraft. And that was because of Wilbur and Orville Wright. They discovered that they needed a vertical tail in order to be able to control the nose in what we call yaw. Because the aircraft normally will not fly very well in yaw. If you go to lift the wing, you create more drag. And so you lift the wing, normally you would want to turn. But instead what Wilbur and Orville Wright found was when they lifted that wing, it created more drag and it went the wrong direction. And this is called adverse yaw. And to correct it, they added the vertical tail. Even aircraft that don't have vertical tails on them, like the B-2, if you go look at photos of the B-2, it drives around with these split open drag devices at the wingtips, which do the same thing. You've never seen a bird with a vertical tail. And for 113 years of aviation, no one had ever figured that out. And I'm the guy. And when you do that kind of a trick in front of your director, he says, "You need to be our chief scientist." Oh, no, sir. No, not this guy. No. He had to ask me 3 times. And you know, I tell my students, I work with interns all the time, I have a box with a 3-position switch: dim, flicker, and off. And there was a moment there where it was on flicker, and it occurred to me that this was my boss I'm telling no. So I'm the chief scientist. Okay, one of the things along the way, you look at this animal, you can see that it's able to just exactly drag its feather along the surface of the water. You can see that line right there. And it's able to do that without a vertical tail. How does it do that? And I figured this out. And we've actually turned that into a technology. Let's go to the next chart. And this is, one of the things that comes out of this is, it turns out when we fly airplanes in formation in order to save fuel, we fly them wingtip to wingtip, okay? The wingtips exactly line up. You'll notice when birds fly in formation, they fly with their wingtips overlapped. And the people who study birds, ornithologists, had seen this many, many times for many years. And they could not figure out why this was. And when they would study this, they said, well, it appears that the wingtip vortices are only like 3/4 of the span, or only 70% of the span, instead of being the full span. And when you do this with an airplane, the wingtip vortices come off and go straight back. And so the bird people were drawing curves on their data to try and make it fit. It's like, square peg, round hole, bigger hammer. And I said, no, you guys are doing it wrong. Draw those straight the way they're supposed to be. That's where the vortices are actually coming from. We turned this into a technology. And so we built a research airplane at our place. This is me with 2 of my interns launching this. And we've turned this into an experiment to try and validate. It turns out there was a paper, a really obscure paper. It was only referenced 4 times before I found it. And the gentleman's name was Ludwig Prandtl. He published it in 1933. Brilliant man. And he said, oh, there's this other way you could do this. And I read that paper and I go, there's something here. And I was the one that made the connection between that paper from 1933 and the flight of birds. And so that was pretty exciting to me, and I started telling anybody who would listen. The airplane people really don't like this idea. I tell the bird people this, and I need to explain that I know every major bird researcher west of the Mississippi River now, on a first-name basis. And they want to talk to me, and they send me their papers, and Al, please read this for me. I said, you realize I'm an idiot. I don't do this. I'm not a biologist. I'm an engineer. And yeah, but I want to know what you think, okay? So we turned this into a technology, and it's actually resulting in a new kind of aircraft. And we've started manufacturing a few of these in order to fly them. They fly very differently than most common aircraft do. They're very easy to fly. In fact, the very first flight that our test pilot flew this particular aircraft, he let go of the stick. And it just kept right on going. There was no problem whatsoever. We didn't have to retrim the aircraft or anything. And I had never heard of anything like that before. There's always some tweaks that you need to do or CG you needed to play with, and this thing didn't behave like that at all. It was very successful. And I do this with young people. I run the intern program. Well, I coordinate the intern program at our place. We have multiple intern programs. In fact, on Monday, I have to talk to a new crop of interns that are coming in. And it's incredibly exciting talking to the interns. And this was actually my crew this past summer. I had 10 interns. It was not by design that I ended up with 5 females and 5 guys. I didn't realize I had done that until they all showed up. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. And I enjoy spending a lot of time with them. I get a lot of energy out of that. Simon did not tell you, I'm almost 60 years old. So they come and talk to me, and it's like, you guys know we're like slightly different generations, right? But they invite me to lunch, and I sit with them at lunchtime, and it's really cool. And we have awesome conversations about what it's like to work for NASA, what it's like to work for that long at NASA. I explain to them that they can't use my path. That path no longer exists. Things have changed so much that they cannot follow in my footsteps. And I know this because their footsteps, they're already doing things. These things, right? They can do things with these things that I have no clue. How do you make it do that? Right? But they're incredibly kind to me. So you think about NASA, and you look at this. right? I need to read you John 1:1. And now you're going to find out something else about me. NRK an o logos, kai o logos en pros ton theon, kai theos on o logos. In the beginning, arche, archaeology, the study of beginnings, arche. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is John. John is my favorite apostle. When he wrote this, he was probably in his 90s. And I imagine that he had perhaps a dozen young people sitting around him at the time. And their job was to write down everything he dictated to them, his scribes. I can only imagine what it must have been like for those young people to be hearing from someone who walked in the hills of Judea with Jesus, and how important that must have been to them. One of the words he uses there, he uses it 3 times. Everybody knows what a logo is, right? You know, your shirt. Simon's walking around in a jacket with a logo on it. So what is a logo? That symbol represents something. It represents the company, right? So here, John is using that word as word, okay? A logo is a word. What is a word? It represents something. You know me as Al. That particular word, that's me, right? You associate that. Jacket, same thing. That word means this thing. In this case, John is talking about Jesus. He says, the Word was with God. And this is also where we get the word logic. And it's also where we get the word, all those ologies that we talk about. That's where all that comes from, out of this Greek word. We ended up going to the moon 50 years ago. It's in our nature to discover and explore, to create things. You remember that phrase way up there in the very beginning, where God talks about creating man in his own image? This is that part of that thumbprint of God that's still on all of us. It's how we create art, music, sculpture, poetry, plays, writing. The study of things that fascinate us with science, our understanding of our place in the universe. I mentioned that we use test pilots. One of the things test pilots have is they use nicknames for each other. So one of the test pilots I know, he's also an astronaut, by the way. His call sign is BRU, B-R-U. And once I heard what BRU was, and I'm going, is that really? I knew not to ask him because it was not a good story. So BRU is Bomb Rack Unit. And this particular gentleman flew in a war, and I imagine he did not come back with the bomb rack unit that was hung on the side of his airplane, because they put all the bombs on there. And you're supposed to get rid of the bombs. You're not supposed to get rid of the entire bomb rack unit, because that means you couldn't go back and load that thing up and go back out and drop some more bombs. And so He probably got a little too excited and hit the wrong button and got rid of the whole bomb rack unit. Those bombs never armed or anything, and I'm sure there's a great big hole out in the desert somewhere with a bunch of bombs and a bomb rack unit on it. So I knew better than to ask him about it. This guy became a space shuttle astronaut, so it's actually kind of cool. But sometimes test pilots, it's really rare for test pilots to talk to people who are not test pilots. But I have a nickname amongst the test pilots. They call me Albatross because of the stuff that I did. And I'm very, very proud of that. I need to explain something else to all of you, because I'm about to say a few things that are going to seem a little odd. I'm a very, very old Earth creationist, all right? I believe that the Earth is many billions of years old. I'm going to explain to you why I believe that. I'm also going to explain to you why I believe that the universe is many billions of years old also. And I don't like the E word. I don't use the E word. People use that word in order to try and divide, and I don't like divisiveness. And if anybody tries to use my words as a club to beat on other Christians, that really disappoints me. That hurts me. I do not want to be divisive. Let's go to the next one. Those guys rode to the moon on this thing. The rocket in that picture is longer than a football field. It weighed 6.6 million pounds at liftoff. Those rocket motors are producing 7.5 million pounds of thrust. They would drain an Olympic swimming pool in 8 seconds. Every 8 seconds for 2 minutes. Every 8 seconds, another Olympic swimming pool. Okay? The flame on the back end of this rocket, it's a Saturn V, was over a half a mile long. This particular launch was Apollo 8. These are the guys going to the moon for the very first time. By the way, this was the very first time anyone had ever ridden on this rocket. I want you to stop and think about that. The audacity of the people to say, yeah, this is the first time we're going to put people on this rocket. Oh, by the way, you're going to the moon. That is courage like I cannot imagine. Courage to do it, even for the people sitting on the ground, but courage for the guys that were going. That's truly something. I got to sit on a review. This was about 4 years ago. And the picture on the top, you'll notice it looks like there's like a light dusting of frost on the top of the bluffs there. And then towards the bottom of that upper picture, that's a slope that's sloping away down the hill. And this is the end of the Martian winter. And there is some sort of frost that is on top of that hill. And I was on the review for this before it came out in the public. And they wanted to know if it was okay for them to say this in public. Because when these guys published this paper, it was going to be one of those moments where, and NASA says, right? And so these guys ended up publishing this data. And you'll notice in the bottom one, there's those long, dark streaks running down the hillside. That's water. That's water on Mars. And when this came out, we did not know exactly how prevalent water was in the universe. We've got just an inkling of an idea that it's incredibly common in the universe. Hydrogen is the most common element. And oxygen is not number 2, but it's up there. It's in the top 5, all right? And when you react hydrogen and oxygen, you get water. It's just that simple. That's water running down the hillside on the side of Mars. I skipped over this earlier. I brought a I brought a moon rock with me, a little tiny chip off of one. These are kind of cool. But so you can imagine that moon rock, right? No big deal, NASA guy has a moon rock. Well, it turns out this is a little tougher one to get. This is a Mars rock. Now, some of you are going, wait a second, we haven't had a spacecraft come back from Mars yet. How on earth could you have a Mars rock? It turns out it's actually pretty simple. And if you imagine that a huge meteorite crashes into Mars and ejects all this material up into space, and it swirls around for many years, and all of a sudden one day the Earth comes running along and runs into one and turns into a meteorite and it lands on Earth. And dang, if the scientists don't crack that thing open and the gases that come out exactly match only one place we know of in the solar system, and that's the atmosphere on Mars. That's the only way that thing could have those gases inside of it. And so it turns out that Mars rocks aren't all that common, but you can get one fairly easily. But I was part of the review for water on Mars. Let's go to the next one. This is a photo from my friend Carolyn Porco. She worked at JPL. She's retired now. It's from a spacecraft called Cassini. Show of hands, how many of you live in a 2-story house? Okay. So the rings that you're looking at are about the same thickness as your house is tall. Most of those rings are about 25 feet thick. You can, with a fairly small telescope, even a pair of binoculars, look at Saturn and you can see the rings. And by the way, this planet is about 1 billion miles away. That is a long ways, and you can still see it. And even though those things are only 25 feet thick. All 4 of the gas giants, it turns out, have a ring system. We've also discovered that there are at least three asteroids that have a ring system as well. We found one that has 2 rings around it. And these are pretty small rocks out there. We were quite surprised to find out that they had ring systems. One of the other things Saturn has on it is a really large moon. And what you're looking at here is the glint of sunlight off of Titan, the large moon, around Saturn. There's liquid on the surface of Titan. And not over the whole thing, just a part of it. And we caught the sunlight glinting off of one of those patches of liquid. We dropped a lander onto Titan, and it didn't last for very long. It did not last as long as we had hoped. And the image that's on the left here is the one that we got back from Titan. And the one on the right is actually river rocks that are here on Earth. Okay? River rocks here on Earth are made of silica. You look at those river rocks, they look a lot like the ones that we got the picture back from on Titan. Except the rocks on Titan are not made of silica. The rocks on Titan are made of water. It turns out for most of the universe, the rocks are made of water. And it turns out that there's a hydrologic cycle. That's a bad word. A water cycle. That's a bad word. Because it's not water. And hydrologic means water-based. It's not water-based. Let's say there's a liquid cycle on Titan. It turns out the atmosphere on Titan is methane. And methane, the temperature on Titan is right near, we call it the triple point. which is where it can exist as either a solid, a liquid, or a gas. And the atmosphere on Titan is methane. And so if you have a liquid on the surface of Titan, and it's methane, and there's somewhere where it's evaporating because of the sunlight, and it forms clouds, and then it rains. Well, if it rains, then you must have rivers on the surface of Titan. So as a joke, astronomers, they love a good joke. They decided to name this particular river the Thames. And keep in mind that there's a massive planet that this thing is orbiting around. Saturn, right there beside it. And so the tides on these seas on Titan are huge because of the gravity. And so this liquid methane is sloshing back and forth in these lakes, and it uncovers reefs that are underneath. We have pictures of this. We have radar images of this liquid methane sloshing back and forth and uncovering these reefs. There are 5 universities in the United States right now that are trying to figure out how to put a boat on these seas. There's no spacecraft to take it there yet, but they're working on the boats that are going to go on this. There's one of them that wants to drop it on the river and go all the way down. Do you want to see pictures from that boat going down? I want to know what that looks like. I talk about this with kids all the time. It's like they get really excited. I love that. Let's go to the next one. I love this one. This is from a spacecraft called New Horizons. The gentleman who did this is Dr. Alan Stern. Alan and I talk every once in a great while. He's really busy. This is Pluto, not a planet. I know. To me, Pluto is a planet. When I was a kid, Pluto was a planet. These mountains, what kind of rocks are they? It's water ice. Yeah. All those layers in the atmosphere, nobody knows why. Over 200 in the photos that we've got. Nobody knows why. Nobody can figure it out. Already, even though the flyby was just 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago now, we need to go back. We have to figure this out. Somebody has to figure this out. I love this. On New Year's Day, this spacecraft is going to be in the news again. It's going to fly by a rock called MU-69. 2015, MU-69. It's a little tiny asteroid that is way out, a couple billion miles beyond the edge of our solar system, beyond Pluto. It's in orbit around the sun, but it takes so long for it to go around the sun, and it's just darkness out there. It's a long ways. And we've never done a flyby of an object that far out. And we don't know if it's a comet or if it's an asteroid. Or maybe it's both. Or it could be neither. But we're going to find out on New Year's Day. So when everybody else is watching the parade, I'm going to be watching the NASA channel. I'm going to read you another verse. This is Job 38. I love this. When you get these like this, it makes my head hurt. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Job talking about gravity? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? We have the word Mazzaroth. We don't know what it means. This was written about 3,500 years ago, and we've lost the meaning of the word. We don't know what it means. Someday we will. Can you guide the bear with its children? Okay, now I'm really confused. We have Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the mama bear and the little bear, right? And it's like, there were more? Which one? Now this one really gets me, because I think we actually do. Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on earth? So that first one, I'm thinking, Isaac Newton, he figures out gravity. He figures out how to do this. What are the orbital mechanics that make those objects move the way they move? And then, can you establish their rule on earth? That last little bit, is that nuclear physics, quantum mechanics, fission and fusion? We have an incredibly limited understanding of all of that right now. Our ability to harness and control that is so much less so than our understanding. But we can vaguely see what it is. I want you to imagine 1,000 years from now. Those people are going to look back at us and they're going to snicker, right? They were so primitive. It's true. Think of all the advances that are going to come. Think of medicine 1,000 years ago, and think of medicine today. Cures for cancer, diabetes, all the diseases caused by viruses. Do you doubt that that's not coming? Isaac Newton was the inventor of calculus. He had to invent a new type of math to describe gravity. And so he did. And the good news is we use his concepts, but we use another guy, Leibniz, we use his notation when we do calculus, which is actually kind of a funny thing, but it works out really well for us. This particular picture, you'll recognize the guy that's staring into the telescope right there, right? This guy is Einstein. The guy standing in the back with the pipe, we named a space telescope after that guy. That's Edwin Hubble. Okay, I want you to stop and think about this. So Einstein, when he comes up with the theory of general relativity, and he writes it all out, and he keeps coming up with this little tiny constant that's left over. And it says that the universe is expanding. And he goes, well, that can't be right. So he creates this cosmic fudge factor. By the way, he did that like 3 times. And he kept coming up with this answer. And he goes, that can't possibly be right. And so he came up with this cosmic fudge factor to make it all come out to be 0. Like 12 years later, he finds out that Edwin Hubble has discovered that the universe is expanding. He jumps on an airplane and flies to the United States to go visit Hubble at Mount Wilson, about 1,000 miles south of here. Observatory run by Caltech. The third gentleman right there is, his name is Walter Adams. He was one of the directors at the place. Einstein goes to meet Hubble. There's an amazing book about this called The Day We Discovered the Universe. And it's, now, one of the things I need to tell you about Hubble, he was a really cantankerous guy. Almost nobody liked to work with him. And one other thing, every paper that Hubble wrote, he would never say that the universe was expanding. He would always say, it appears that the universe is expanding. He didn't actually want to put his neck on that chopping block. And Einstein, by the way, he's jumping up and down going, the universe is expanding! I love it. Einstein was that kind of a guy. There was another argument many years later, and this is one of the most fundamental things about physics. Physics, and it doesn't matter whether it's the cosmic variety or the simple, very garden variety, F equals ma, you're playing with marbles kind of experiment. You have a certain input, there's a certain output that comes out the other side. You can figure it out, right? And one of the guys that came along after Einstein, his name was Werner Heisenberg. And Heisenberg said that you cannot know precisely the answer that you get, that there's a randomness to the universe. And Einstein's reply, I thought this was so great. He said, God does not play dice. God does not play dice. Einstein believed to his dying day that there was a precision that even if we could not experience it and understand it yet, that if you applied that correct precision to the answer, you would get the correct answer. It was not random. So I told you I was going to explain a few things. Psalm 19, 1 and 2. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. I believe that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. That's what the data says to us. Now, our understanding of that data, I will grant you, can change. But that number is going to be still a very large number in about that range. And I'll tell you why I think that. God could have created the entire universe with those signals all the way already on their way to us to tell us that this was the age of the universe. But I do not believe it is in the nature of God to create something that could be construed as a lie. And so this is now, my understanding is very, very poor. I will grant you that. And I will not use this against my brothers and sisters. And if you think that the universe is 4,400 years old, I agree with you. That is a good answer. That is a valid answer. There are three words that get used here. In Greek, they are Gaia, which is earth. Quite literally, it's dirt, okay? You can think of that as, and you can imagine how some cultures are married to the dirt that they live on. At the same time, there's another word that gets used, and it's a word we still have, and it's cosmos. And this is better translated, I think, as the word world. And you can think of the world as being this way. And this is the cosmos in its entirety. And if you stop and think about it, the earth fits into that model also. There's one last word that gets used, Uranos. And this is the heavens themselves. And this is not Gaia. And I think that word gets used in two different ways. One is a spiritual sense, and one in a literal sense. The stars that we can see. Let's go to the next chart. Now I'm going to make your heads hurt. One of the things that Einstein discovered when he did relativity, all of you probably know the equation, right? E equals mc squared. Thank you. So energy is equal to the matter, the mass of the matter, times the velocity of light squared. Okay? So stop and think about this. You can go from matter to energy. It should be possible to go back the other way too. Okay. Thought experiment. If I have an asteroid and it has a certain amount of mass, better yet, I have a certain amount of mass. It's a number bigger than I would like it to be, but I have a certain amount of mass. Okay. It turns out that gravity is pulling on me by the weight, my weight, down onto the ground. But at the same time, my gravity, because of my mass, is pulling on the entire Earth by that same number. Now, let's imagine for a moment you could instantly get rid of me, turn me into energy. I no longer have any matter. I would prefer that not to happen right at this moment, but let's say you could do that. All of a sudden, there would be a hole in the gravity, and that hole in the gravity would propagate throughout the universe. And how fast does that propagate? Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. This was the thought experiment. And Einstein, he comes up with this idea and he goes, I don't know, I can't believe that would happen. And even if it could happen, I don't know that we would ever be able to measure it. So it turns out there were 4 people who thought they could measure it. And they ended up getting about $12 billion to prove it. And they went looking for what are called gravity waves. What happens is you have 2 massive objects that are orbiting each other. And because of the tidal forces, the energy is being dissipated. And so they come closer and closer, and it goes faster and faster and faster until finally, these astronomers use the word merge. I think of it as collision. And it's massive. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these 2 gravity waves. 2 of them in particular. It turns out we have detected 7 of these now. All right? The very first one was in September of 2015. It was called GW 150914. GW 150914. And because it was in 2015, 9th month, September, the 14th of September. All right? 2 rotating black holes. Now, here's where the arithmetic goes. These 2 black holes were orbiting each other. One weighs about 35 times the amount of the sun. The other one is about 30 times the mass of the sun. 35 and 30, right? At the collision, you should get 65, right? No. You get 62. What happened to those other 3 masses of the sun? Energy. Now, these are black holes. You can't see anything. All right? But the only energy that can escape from a black hole is gravity. You annihilate the gravity. Now, I want you to imagine that I have a steel rod that I'm pointing at these 2 black holes. And when those 3 solar masses disappear, this rod, which was stretched just a little bit because of the mass of those 65, is now 62. And that rod gets a little bit shorter. And that heats the rod up. Paperclip. You bend it back and forth, it gets hot, right? That's energy that's being dissipated in the paperclip. There's energy being dissipated in the steel rod. That energy has to come from somewhere. E = mc². It's coming from those black holes. It is possible, if you continue to extract energy from a black hole, that they evaporate, they disappear. You keep saying, but things only go into the black hole. It can't come back. It's coming back out. It's the gravity. We've detected these. Okay. Now comes the part that's really going to make your head hurt. This entire event was 0.2 of a second when it was recorded. In the last 20 milliseconds, okay, the last 20 milliseconds of this event, physics, you go all the way back to these two black holes at the point of impact. Nothing explodes, nothing comes out, right? But the energy that's coming out in these gravity waves, 3.6 by 10 to the 49 watts. That is 50 times the radiation energy of every star in the entire universe. 50 times the radiation of the entire universe from these two black holes colliding. No wonder they could measure this thing on Earth. Okay. In those same 20 milliseconds, they accelerated from, now, 65 times the sun. They accelerated from 30% of the speed of light to 60% of the speed of light. The accelerations are staggering to think about that much mass being made to go that fast. Given that these black holes were the size they were and how long backwards you had to work, we think both of those black holes were formed in orbit around each other about 2 billion years after the Big Bang, and that they were about 11.4 billion years old. And when they were stars, they were between 40 and 100 times the mass of the sun. Second, this is the 6th gravity wave ever recorded. I love this one because it's going to explain something every single one of you has on you right now. Well, perhaps not every single one of you, but almost. You'll know exactly. All right, this is gravity wave 170817. So 2017, August 17th. 2 rotating neutron stars. Here's the thing, not black holes. You can see these things, all right? Took almost 2 seconds. Let's go to the next chart. It turns out that as they're coming closer together, they speed up. And when you look at the frequencies, these things happen at an audible frequency. If you play this back through a speaker, you can hear it. It's called a chirp. It sounds like a bird. And those curves that you see are actually going up in frequency. And this is from about 40 hertz up to about, probably 400 hertz. So this is right in the range, the audible range, okay? All right, neutron stars. The whole thing lasted about 100 seconds. There was a gamma ray burst 1.7 milliseconds after the merge. And 11 hours later, you see this image on the right? Do you see that little tiny square with that really bright star? This thing is called a kilonova. It's bigger than a supernova. Supernovas create everything, okay, fusion in stars, hydrogen, helium. The helium, eventually you run out of the hydrogen, you start burning the helium. You start creating all the other elements up to carbon. You can't go any further than carbon. Okay, how do you get anything heavier than that? Well, if the star is big enough, at the instant that it runs out of helium, the whole thing, the core implodes and the rest of the star explodes. This is called a supernova. and you get everything all the way up to iron. Okay? How do you get anything heavier than iron? It turns out the only place this can come from is colliding neutron stars. This particular event that I'm describing, after they got all done, they found out that 17 times the mass of the Earth in silver, gold, and platinum. That's the only place gold can come from in the universe. That was my reaction too. My wife had already gone to sleep by the time I got to that point. All right. By the way, one of the 4 astronomers that came up with this device, by the way, they use a device that's 4 kilometers long in one axis and 4 kilometers long in the other. Your state has one of these. It's at Hanford. There's one in Louisiana. There's one in Italy. The one in Italy is a little bit smaller, and it's not quite as accurate as the 2 that are here in the U.S. The 4 people won the Nobel Prize in 2017, which is actually kind of funny because they spent $12 billion to win $1 million. All right. Sounds like a government program. Okay. One incredibly cool thing that came out of this particular one that you could see, there were 4,000 astronomer co-authors. That's about 1/3 of all the astronomers on the planet. And that was pretty dang cool that they came together and did that. Let's go to the next one. How much more do we not know yet? I mean, it's just staggering. There's so many discoveries out there. Do any of you doubt that 1,000 years from now, we will not be a spacefaring race? If people are still around, that is. Closer to home, one of the greatest collective gifts to us is our home. It's a gift from God. We are not treating it well. It's not what we should do for our children, our children's children, and their children. Our Earth is incredibly unique. We are the right distance from the sun to have liquid water. By the way, very close to the triple point. So water can exist as a liquid, as a solid, and as a gas. We have a liquid iron core. We're the only terrestrial planet that has a liquid iron core. Mars chilled out many, many years ago. The volcanoes are still there. You can actually see them. 4 huge volcanoes. But the core is gone. And so there's no magnetic field in order to protect the atmosphere of Mars. Mars has 1% of the atmosphere of the Earth because the solar wind has stripped it away. Almost all the water is gone because of that as well. We're the only terrestrial planet with an active magnetic field. Protects us from radiation and the solar wind. And it's why we have a thick, richer atmosphere. And the location of our orbit gives us that liquid water. We have a really large moon that gives us the tides that help support the life in this very rich intertidal zone, which is why your city is where it is. Climate change is incredibly real. And I need to add something at this point. Till 2008, I was a climate change denier, okay? And there's nothing worse than a convert, because they turn into zealots really fast. And it's a very real threat to us. And it's a sad testament to our inability to control ourselves. My generation has done an incredibly poor job. For all you young people, I apologize, because we're leaving the place a mess. for you to clean up. I want to leave you with a closing thought. A little less than 2,000 years ago, there was a really outrageous guy stomping around the hills of Judea. And he had a business plan. And his business plan was to take 12 illiterate fishermen and told them to go change the world. That's not a good business plan. And yet, look what happened. There's only one thing that could possibly make that happen. I want to tell you guys, Simon came up here and talked about some stuff. Oh, shoot. I didn't even talk about this. You guys need to come up and play with this, especially the kids. There's a hand controller off of an Apollo spacecraft. We think it's Apollo 15 because we have a bunch of Apollo 15 stuff at our place, okay? So I'm going to leave this right here for everybody to play with afterwards, especially the kids, because that's been to the moon. I am not a perfect person by a long shot. None of us is. You all know that. We all make mistakes. There is corruption, and the universe is broken. You know that. And it's caused by rebellion in ourselves. And I screw up all the time. Please don't talk to my wife. She will tell you. But because of that, and I cannot fix myself. That is simply not possible. And the penalty for that is that I should die. Absolutely. No question. Because God is perfect. If he wasn't perfect, he wouldn't be God, would he? And would you want to worship an imperfect God? I already have one of those. We all need a Savior. The expression is that God sent his Son. That's true, but it's not complete. Because as soon as the realization is that there's this problem, the Son jumps up and says, "Dad, send me." And he walks up on that hill. I want you to imagine this, all right? That Roman soldier that's whipping him, tearing the flesh out of his back. Every atom in that soldier's body is being held together by the will of Jesus to make this happen. How much did he love you? He loved you that much to make that happen. Taking what we deserve. If you're not a believer in Jesus, you need to know the Jesus that I know, because he will change your life. He changed mine. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.